All right, so we are going to talk about for some people, probably the most dreaded part of the rally, which
for me, it's the best part. Are you kidding me? I get to, and for the parents, it's the best part. It's the cleanest they've ever seen their competitor.
I know. It is very satisfying to have totally clean tack and a beautifully turned out horse. And so we're going to talk about what the turnout inspection is all about and what they're looking for. So take it away, Yvette.
All right. So normally in a rally situation, I know this is hard to believe, but the competitors are usually really nervous. So throughout the time, I know, shocker, I can't believe I just released one of the dirtiest secrets. No, but I try to have the conversation. Normally the competitor will come up, tell me their name, their number. This is what I love about Pony Club, because they empower individuals to say, hey, this is who I am, this is my horse, and these are the things that you should be worried about. So I use that as the starting point. It's like, hey, how are you feeling? How has your prep gone today? And they can tell me, oh my goodness, especially with the gray, they'll be like, oh, he rolled, or just like red is moving now, oh, he doesn't want to stand still. And that's when I reassure them that this is not going to affect the judging, that we will adjust as you're going along, and that you are here to show me how awesome you are in all of your hard work. So I normally start with the rider, but we will do that separately since I saved Jess from getting dressed up. But one of the things that I do want to make sure that I record is an easy way to get and exceed standards. And you can see we're wearing our Pony Club pins, and there's a way to tell a judge what your certification is right away, and that's the felt backings, where it says a D
yes.
Pony Club member wears a yellow backing. I'm not wearing mine today. It's on my show coat, but this is implementing quiz. So a quick way to get and exceed standards is look up, see which color you would be for your certification, and have that felt backing. You can just buy some felt, put it back there. In fact, I'm always surprised when a competitor comes up now at this point, because it's so known that you've gone above and beyond. So that is the only way that you can get exceed standards on your Pony Club pin. But I wanted to make sure I did that. But then I do the rider, and then I always say what I'm doing to the competitor, not this. That is the worst, is when somebody's walking around with a clipboard and not talking and they're writing. And you want to make sure the competitor understands what you're looking at. So I will start at the front of the horse, and pretty much every certification, hey, have we wiped? I know, hello, how are you? I give a lot of horse kisses at this point, but do we wipe the eyes, the nose? Does the face look clean? And this is pretty much, it scales every certification level. But they're the same basic things. Is the horse clean? And clean is different based on certification. So it's based on the standards of proficiency, not what Yvette says is clean. I always tell competitors the rule book is there to protect you from crazy people. And it saves me from judging you on preference. I am judging you not against other competitors. I'm judging you against the standards of proficiency. And what do we tell our D Pony Club members? 5 grooming tools. So if they've bathed their horse, fantastic. But have they brushed their horse? Can I tell they've gone over their horse? There's no shavings on their horse. You can tell the little ones, and with a taller horse, were they able to get help to use their rub rack? Have they used their 5 grooming tools? As they proceed through the standards of proficiency, I'll expect a little bit more. But again, starting at the bottom, have they made an attempt to remove stains? Did they do a good job getting socks clean? And also I'm scaling the weather as well. So
right.
if we're doing a rally in March in the Northeast, it's cold. Who wants to give their horse a bath in the middle of winter, even if the horse is clipped? So I'm always scaling how the skin feels given the time of the rally. At the higher levels, I'm looking for a little more polish, a little more shine. They have more of the elbow grease on the day-to-day. I will show you now the most dreaded stance that you can see at a rally, especially with a red horse, looking for dandruff. And this is scaled as we've calibrated a little more, and the horses hate this pose as much as anyone. But at the D level, we're just asking, hey, have they brushed the horse's tail? But at the C and higher, do they know that the horse has a tailbone? That's always a magical discovery, that the horse has a tailbone. And the tailbone has skin and there can be flakes. So at the C1 level, and this would be more at the C1 level, and might even be a little bit more does not meet standards. We are at the tail end of winter in this area of the country. So, is the tailbone clean? Are there large flakes? C1, it says a little bit of dandruff. C1 and C2, it's a little bit of dandruff that the tailbone exists. Then C3 and higher is no dandruff. I kind of scale it at the C1. There might be some big flakes, but that the tailbone exists and all the hair is clean. Whereas like here you can see, okay, this horse hasn't had his tail washed, probably because it's March. But that is the hair equally clean throughout. There might be some large flakes that shake out, as there are some large flakes here. And again, this is what I expect this time of year. I have some tricks that I'll teach you though later, Jess.
Oh.
I'll show you my secret sauce. At the C2 level, they should be able to comb out most of it. I'm still not expecting dandruff free. But at the C3 level, is that tailbone clean? And you'll be shocked. Like once a Pony Club member gets a hang of this, you never see a horse with dandruff. They understand, the tailbone's clean, even with thick ponytails. And my pony has a really bushy tail, and it took me years to find his tailbone. You would be surprised. Typically it's the tail. This is where people with grays have a real big advantage, because grays tend not to have dandruff, but it's because you spend all the rest of your time doing all the gray and the white hair. You can tell pretty quickly if a horse has dandruff in the mane. My advice to Pony Club members is, if you're worried about accentuating dandruff in the mane, which you can easily I think it's easier to get rid of than in the tail, don't braid. You're not required to braid for Pony Club. So why would you draw attention to dandruff? And they're always like, oh, interesting. So, I'm always going along, and it is really important to say what you're checking, and if something is not meeting standards, make sure that the competitor sees it. So in the case of this tail, I would have somebody else hold Jess's horse so that she could see exactly what I was seeing. This is where these miscommunications on turnout inspections, it becomes, this is what they said. And so I like to have the communication of make sure that they see the form where I've scored them as, you're doing really, really great here. You're right on target. I explained that in the meet standards column. You're doing great. You are right where I expect you to be. If you exceed standards, this is why. And if you're not meeting the standards, this is why. And you make a note of it, because if you are not the chief, you can't take points. And so you are eyes and ears for the chief horse management judge. And I do not like to handle inquiries from turnout inspection because it becomes competitor versus judge. And I have to stick with my judges for them, and I can't have a competitor bring their horse to me 3 hours later and look for a speck of dandruff. So, try to be as clear as possible as to like if, all the TACK here, but if I show them that there's caked mud, or do you feel that you missed the brush here, and then they're like, oh, okay. One thing that I'm always cautious with, and this requires a lot of discussion with the competitor, is if I'm reaching into the sheath or udder, I ask how their horse is. And this is my personal opinion, is it is not my favorite thing to check a horse that I don't know for cleanliness, even if it's external, which is what's on the standard. It's kind of atypical, right? You have your horse tacked up, ready to go. Who says, hello, how are you? And checks his sheath and udder. I will do kind of the okay in the area and see how the horse reacts. I can't tell you how many times, even just getting in that region, the horse will kick, and then I believe the kid. Like I will always, err on the side of, if the competitor says my horse is really touchy in that area, I'm going to proceed with caution, but I will check, but I will make it quick. But I wouldn't. It's not meant to be surgery, is the point. But you know, it's like, it's always looking at the big picture, then getting into the details, and that's kind of how the standards are on the forms. You know, you look at the D1 requirements for mount, neatly brushed, no shavings, burrs, etc. in the mane or tail, and feet picked out. That's what you expect for a D1, right?
Right.
Then you go to the C3 and higher sheet, which is the highest sheet you could be. The mount has a lot more lines. Well-groomed, reflecting regular care. Okay, does the coat have a little bit of sheen? Mane and tail clean and tangle-free. Okay, that's pretty obvious, you know, if you can run your hands through it. No dandruff. Sheath udder showing regular care. Feet well-trimmed and or shod. Feet picked out. Eyes, nose, lips, stock, wiped. I want to talk a little bit about exceeds, because if it is on, my strategy with exceeds is, if I know it's on a sheet above or 2 above, it is always going to be exceeds. So if a D3 comes to me and I can run my hand straight through that tail, always going to be an exceeds. So familiarity with the forms above the one that you're judging. You may not necessarily feel that you could do a testing at that level, but knowing what's on the sheets really helps you scale your judging, and that's where the notes become really important, because saying tangle-free tail, even if it's not checked as exceeds by the assistant as chief, I will go back in and I will check it as exceeds, because I know it's on the highest sheet and a D3 has gone well above that. Some of the other things, like thinking about hooves, that's always a question. Like it says feet well maintained and shod, and every once in a while you'll have a D pony club member, and they might not be responsible for their horse. They may be a competitor from a riding center, which is fantastic. It may not be the horse that they ride all the time, but they ride frequently. Thinking about how much control they have over when to call the farrier. And I have gauged that, and most chiefs have gauged that as around the C2 level, that they have enough skill to say they might not be paying for the farrier, but they have enough knowledge to say something is wrong. We should have the farrier out because the shoe is loose. And again, it goes back to the standards of proficiency. What are we teaching in the standards? So that's pretty much what I'm looking for in the horse. There are those things that will bump it up. Braiding is not required for any of the pony club disciplines. And if you choose to braid, I can't judge you on the quality of the braiding, but I can say, hey, nice effort. You know, hoof oil, again, not required, and depending on how detailed you are in applying the hoof oil, sometimes I wish you hadn't. But you know, it's like I appreciate those nice touches, but really, if you are doing good grooming all the time, it shouldn't be that much of a stretch beyond in the spring at the higher levels. You might want to give your horse a bath. So that's pretty much what I'm looking for on the horse, and always making sure. Again, it's always, I have the same tools that you have. I have hands, and if it feels good or feels gross, or you know, if I come off and I've patted your horse's rump, I call smoke signals. You know, how dusty is too dusty. If I have a black hand after I run my hand over your horse, these are the things that I'm looking for. All right, so after I check the rider and the horse in the turnout inspection, I go back and I do the TACK. And the reason why I segment it is that's how the form is broken up. It goes rider, mount, and TACK. And this way, I can kind of take mental notes of all 3 at once, but I make sure that I'm communicating everything to the competitor. I think that is a huge thing. And I remember when I was a young pony club member not knowing, and now the forms are really detailed, but it'd be like, what are they looking at? What are you looking for? Is there something wrong? When they're quiet, when a judge is quiet, you're worried the entire time, I'm doing something wrong, or is that bad? And so the more that I have a conversation with a competitor, the more they realize what I'm doing, and they'll be like, oh, I understand what you're looking at, instead of what's going on. Right. You know, we've all been in that position. Is there something wrong? So the last thing I do is I check the TACK. And this is my favorite part, because I love shopping for TACK, and I love seeing some of these competitors have much nicer TACK than I have. So it's like, ooh, what's that? And again, it's a conversation. So I always start with the bridle. And yes, what's going on over there? Again, a point of conversation just to make sure competitors, particularly our younger ones, are breathing. What kind of bit do you have in your horse's mouth? How does that work? Or if they have a Micklem bridle, oh, hey, I see you have a Micklem bridle. Do you find that that relaxes your horse? Again, it's by standard, but I'm looking for a couple of things. First and foremost, I'm looking for safety. I think that gets lost in the beauty of turnout inspection is that we're making sure that we're sending our competitors out to be safe. So first and foremost, safe. Is it properly adjusted? Every once in a while, you'll see the younger competitor who has so proudly reassembled their bridle, but the straps are in the wrong order. So I'm making sure that the horse is going to be comfortable and safe. This is where every once in a while you'll see that perhaps things didn't get put together or readjusted properly. So safety, proper adjustment, and then last, I'm looking at the cleanliness and the conditioning of the tack. So, instead of, I think turnout becomes such a, oh, how clean is it? I'm actually looking at so many other things before I get to the cleanliness. So for the Ds, it really is, there are two lines, safe and clean. It grows to the D3 clean bit. At the lower levels, if it's not a line, this is where we teach our D Pony Club members that, hey, that grass that your horse ate actually dries up on the bit, and that's what that is.
Right there.
Not that this bit is disgusting, but these lines, a lot of times I'm glad that this is a D-ring miler that this horse is wearing. The residue from the leather will sit there. What is that? What is that, Miss Yvette? And then I can explain, oh, this is why you soak your bit in a bucket of water or, put it in the dishwasher. I show them things about hook stud reins. I'm so excited that you have hook stud reins. This is where I'm looking at safety and teaching them a little bit about, because sometimes they might not know how to undo. The younger members might not know how to undo it. I can show them that this is a stress point. But overall it scales. At the higher levels, we're looking to make sure that the metal is polished. I'm feeling the suppleness. If I have a case of a really stiff bridle, I will, you don't want to damage the tack by any means. But if it's stiff, ask the competitor, would you want to wear this? Does it feel scratchy? Have you ever worn a sweater that feels scratchy? And that makes sense to them. But always saying, and with adjustment, if there's something that you're questioning, is this how you always adjust it? Yes. And for point issues or where you need to bring somebody else into the conversation, we consider C2s and higher to be competent. If that's the adjustment they want, then we leave it alone. If it's a D Pony Club member or a C1 Pony Club member, we will bring in the coach, we will bring in the parent. You do not adjust tack without permission. That is a big difference. Some of the things like a loose girth, pretty easy to say this is a no-brainer. But if I'm adjusting a bit or a martingale, I always make sure that there is a coach or someone who is going to be there when that child is riding, particularly in a child, but when that competitor is riding, because I don't want to cause a safety issue. Some horses are quirky. For instance, I have a horse that has a tumor at his rib cage, so his saddle sits further back than a lot of judges' likings. But when you look at his rib cage, you can see that girth needs to be further back. So, it becomes a conversation. And the conversation is different based on skill level. So that's the bridle. Sometimes some horses will have a breastplate or a martingale. If they have a breastplate or a running martingale, we'll ask them to adjust it so that we can make sure that it fits properly. If it's a running martingale, there needs to be the stoppers on the reins. If there aren't stoppers, you get all ninja and you make them, because our goal is to send the kids out safe. If it's a standing martingale, which is allowed for some disciplines, you need the stopper on the middle of the standing martingale. And then you move to the saddle. And this is where, you have a couple things you're looking for. Again, we're always looking for safety. The big thing for safety is going to be, are the bars down? You would be shocked. Every year I judge about 10 to 15 rallies, I at least have 5 instances of the bars going up. And when you have the conversation with the competitor, it's like, yeah, because my stirrup leather kept flying out. It's like, maybe we need to work on your leg. But you know, you do, whenever you make a correction or you find something, and this is the hard thing, I'm joking about it now, but think about how you're making that competitor feel when you make a comment. So you can't say, oh, you know, this is awful, or you know, are you stupid? This is in your book. No, it's like, oh, did you know that this is up and it should be down? And then you do the demonstration. You never make the competitor feel bad about knowledge they may not have, and that is, you know, you might have been having that reaction for a safety purpose, but you know, it's always thinking about how you're making that competitor feel. All right, so once you verify that the bars are down, I go right to work with the stirrup leathers. First and foremost, checking the stitching. By the way, I love these leathers. These are awesome. This is what I do. I'm like, oh, where did you get these? And then I go shopping, and then I get distracted. But, you know, so you're checking the stitching up by the buckle because that's a pressure point. You're checking at the higher levels, has the competitor cleaned the metal marks. A lot of times you'll see they permanently come down because that's where the iron is always sitting, and you think about the metal rubbing against the leather, and it will leave like a little bit, and Jess has done a nice job of cleaning hers, but there will be like a divot with it will be reflective, and it's great we have the sun out today because I look for the shimmer, and then it's like, okay, these are metal marks, these are stress points. So when you see stress points on the score sheet, that's what we're looking at. Anywhere where metal comes into contact, same on the bridle, but certainly on the leathers. So, and then I also, and I always check, and on these stirrup irons, she's got the metal stirrup pads, but if you have rubber stirrup pads, I'm looking at the wear. In addition to the cleanliness, but first and foremost, safety, I'm looking at the wear. They have little triangles, even just like the metal ones, little triangles to give you tread. They start to get dry, so the edges will start to peel, or they'll flatten out. The more you ride, the faster they go. But I usually say about every 6 months, like I will do a replacement in the spring and I will do a replacement in the fall. And it's the cheapest thing you can buy in the tack store, pretty much, besides braiding rubber bands. So you know, it's a pretty cheap thing. I usually buy them in bulk. So I check the stirrup leathers, I check the suppleness. You know, another thing is just making sure that there are enough holes if they need to adjust. I'm less worried about that because that's more rider position and less safety. But you know, you can see, and I'm guilty of this as well. If they aren't nylon lined leathers, you look at the stretch. And so the longer they get, you look for the holes. Are the holes getting longer? That's where you have the discussion about, okay, it might be time to replace your leathers just because they're getting pulled really thin. All right, so then after I check the stirrups, I will go lift the flap, and then I am checking the girth. So first and foremost, I'm checking tightness of the girth. Nothing worse than a saddle that's sliding around in the middle of a round. Nice tight, you check up here. I will check down at the bottom in the center of the chest. That helps with the more triangular ponies because sometimes it'll feel loose up here, but then when you reach down here, you realize that girth really is snug. I also make note of, when I'm judging for someone else, how many holes I had to adjust it if it was too loose. If it's one hole, that becomes like a slightly below standard, which signals 1 point. If it's 2 or 3, which is a lot, that's a pretty loose girth, you know, that becomes slightly below. But if you mark how many holes, again, make sure the competitor sees how many holes you're adjusting. Usually the second you lift the flap and say, hey, is your girth adjusted where it is? That's when they say, oh, you know, and then all of a sudden the horse puffs, or, you know, and you have that conversation. But that's the beauty of the turnout inspection, is that you're having that conversation with the competitor. When I lift the flap, I'm looking for a couple of things. I'm looking for the billet guard to be pulled down over the buckles of the girth, but I'll get back to that in a little bit. But I'm looking at, you know, is the girth set up on the first and third billets? You know, again, that's due to construction of the saddle. The first two are usually attached to the same piece of nylon strapped over the tree, and the third one is on a separate piece. So that helps with balance. Also, if it breaks, you have that extra billet in the middle. It will always work. I'm looking at the condition of the billets. Are they supple? This is where I'll see a lot of cracked leather. There's a lot of pressure. You think about a pony puffing his belly, and you're trying, you're 8 years old, and the girth is down here, yet you've got to get it up. The buckles are down here, and the billets are up here. So there's a lot of pressure put on these, and it's really important that they're supple. So they do take some wear. There's a difference between rippling. So these are nice, supple billets. They've been well cared for. But you will see like actual physical cracks if the billets are allowed to get too dry. And so that becomes a conversation of how soon will they break? You know, why do we need to take good care of it? When a competitor presents with a newer saddle, I always talk about that. This is your opportunity to protect your billets now. Take take time to condition them, because if they're forgotten, this will go. And when you have to take your saddle in to get the billets replaced, you're out of a saddle. And if that's your only saddle, you're going to have to borrow or do something. So look to make sure that the billets are in good shape. Billet guard, a lot of times I will lift the saddle. Now this is a nice big one, but you know, with the saddles with a smaller rectangle, a lot of times I will see it as a crumpled blob up at the top of the billets, and I'll be like, do you know what that's called? No, what is that thing? It gets in my way. And then I know that I need to do a little bit of education, and usually the clue that the competitor, besides it being a crumpled mess up at the top, is you'll see some nice shiny metal marks where the buckles from the girth have been rubbing, and I usually have a clue on the outside if I'm going to have a non-billet guard aware competitor. So I do the lesson. A lot of times it's crumpled up here, and the saddle pad will frequently be attached below. So I'm usually doing a little bit of rejiggering. In the case that the competitor doesn't have billet guards, which I have seen, a lot of times saddles coming from riding schools, they get lost, you know, they become a nuisance, and so they fall off. I have the conversation with the competitor so that they know about it. A good thing is that you can get inexpensive billet guards, but if it's not in the competitor's control, sometimes I will have that conversation with the club leader or the riding center leader to be like, hey, this is always going to be a point issue for your competitors. You know, could you perhaps get some extra billet guards, keep them in your kits and bring them to rally, you know, trying to think. I understand the practicalities of a riding school and not wanting to have billet guards dropped all over, but I can't say, oh, well, this is a riding school or it's a borrowed saddle. Like, they need to have it, and it says pretty clearly on the form that they need to have it. So there's usually that piece. After I check to make sure everything is adjusted, that's when I get into the cleanliness. You know, it is for a D, it's have they wiped off the saddle, have they gotten rid of heavy dust, all the way up to the higher level certifications where I'm going to go and look at the rivets and be like, did they polish it? Did they get the green funk from around it? Have they taken the time to get up into the crevices of the saddle? You know, in addition to heavy dust, you know, is it supple? Does it move and not turn a different color? So, you know, and that's all scaled by certification. I also have the conversation of, is this a new saddle? How long have you had it? Because if they are borrowing it, you know, I'm trying to figure out how much control they have over it. Doesn't change where it sits in their certification level, but you can provide feedback that's meaningful without making them feel like, oh, my saddle wasn't good enough. You know, I always get the competitor that says, oh, the saddle's really old. And I love old tack. So I'm like, yes, and isn't that exciting that this saddle is older than you? And look at how well cared for it is. And they just puff up right away. They're like, oh, I did something good, because it is a lot harder work to polish the metal on an older saddle that has been conditioned and loved. And so, you know, making them feel better about the equipment they have. I know that seems really silly, but you think about where a lot of our competitors are. They're teenagers, so they're comparing themselves to competitors who might have newer tack, and they feel like, oh, I don't have the best of the best or the newest of the new. And that's not what Pony Club is about. It is about taking care of what you have. And I love it when they say, oh, well, this saddle was my mom's and she used it in Pony Club. And I was like, and the fact that you can use it as a Pony Club member shows you how everything you learn in Pony Club is so important to preserving this, because could you imagine if you had to buy a saddle? So that conversation is always really great and really fun, and something that I've become more and more aware of, particularly in regions where there might be a lot of wealth and then clubs that may not have it. What I love about horse management is it's a take-home test. So, you know, it's not based on a round, it's not based on opinion, it's based on the standards, and I scale my expectations based on your standards, not what you have, not who has the fanciest horse. And frequently the kids who have had to work and scrape it all together, or they've bought the TACK themselves, they do a bang up job as opposed to the kid with all the shiny new new stuff. So it's a lot of fun for me, and making them feel better. All right, so one of the questions I get frequently, especially as the riding center program grows in Pony Club, is you have school TACK, and that varies. It can be newer TACK or it can be older TACK. It's all well-loved TACK, which is the best part about it. And so some of the older TACK, some of the older saddles, and I have older TACK as well, this seam here, and you'll see it a lot with games ponies, where you figure all the pressure those saddles go through with the kids vaulting on and off. These seams at the top of the seat might start to spring a leak, as it were, and you know, the question is, are we fine with patches? And again, it is a superficial area, and you can easily preserve a saddle. Most of the time the rider is there, so you can preserve the saddle by putting a patch that may not be the prettiest thing, but that's perfectly acceptable. What you're looking for is it safe, or is it something that it's rigged in such a way that it's no longer safe, that it could change the functionality of the equipment. So like, instead of using a leather girth extender, I decided I wanted to make a loop of baling twine between the billet and my, obviously not safe. So, you know, you're looking at those sorts of things. Aesthetics should be the last thing on your mind. And so, you know, it is always, what is the whole picture? And that's how I judge too. When a competitor walks up, and it's different now that a lot of the competitors wear their certification on their felt backing, so I have a little bit of a clue. But like, when a competitor walks up, I immediately have an idea of what certification they might be, and it's always interesting when I pull up the form and I'm like, oh, I thought at least you were a C2, the way, and that immediately makes the competitor, they've put on, like, you want them to know that they have done a great job with their external picture. And even if you do find things along the way that might be penalized, as sad as that might be, reassuring them that the general picture, which is what the riding judge is going to see, that's a big deal to them. So a lot of times you'll see a competitor with a ton of exceed standards, but they might have missed the mark on something, say stress points, or, you know, they might not have pulled their billet guard down. But reassuring them that the big picture is great. There is a lot of value to that as well, because they have worked really hard to look really good, and for a lot of them, they've had to learn to manage their time. If they're one of the first turnouts of the morning, they had to balance morning chores with getting there on time, and heaven forbid they have a gray, and they've worked really hard. So any point, it's not even just a sandwich, it is every time I start the turnout inspection with something positive, and even in the case of, wow, you showed up on time, you know, or you were really early, but, you know, I always like to guess if the competitor is going for the next certification, because you should be able to tell. And talk to them. That's part of the conversation you're having. Hey, is this your first time rallying with this certification? That will give you some clues of what might be challenging, what they need to work on. Similarly, if they look really good and you're like, there's no way you're just this certification, you must be going for this. Oh yeah, I am. I've been working on it. And so then I can reassure them, hey, you know, keep up the good work, or this might be something that you need to work on. So it gives them a little bit window of things that they need to repeat. And even if it's exceeding standards, at some point as they climb the certification scale, it will become their standard. So you cannot under-communicate with our competitors by any means, because for them, horse management is a black box. They don't understand it. The last thing I do with the competitors, They are not allowed to walk away until I show them everything. I show them on the form if they were solid in their certification and everything's in the meet standards. I'm like, that's perfect. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. I will make an effort of saying, I will count out loud how many exceed standards they got. And I give them a high five. I mean, I'm a high fiver. It's just kind of so they know. And I explain what the exceeds is, because a lot of times they see that as bonus points, which once you read the rule book, you know it's not bonus points, but it's important for tie break. So, you know, I like to accentuate, and even at rallies, I will do I will do special awards for the most exceed standards, or like I try to acknowledge the 10 competitors with the highest number, acknowledging that it's like, you really went above and beyond, keep that up. But I also make sure that if it's slightly below, which is SBS, or far below, I show them the notes, and I make sure, and we've talked about it before, if there's an issue, like if there's an issue on the saddle, I'm going to make sure that the competitor sees it with his or her own eyes, so that they know, they understand the comment, because it becomes very challenging in the inquiry period if they didn't understand why the comment was made. And those are the hardest inquiries for me to handle as a chief, because there needs to be that communication. They need to see what was there. And so I always encourage my assistants, whether you have a scribe or you're writing it yourself, if it's like a little dirty is not helpful to me. I need you to tell me that the stirrups had mud caked on the bottom, that there were stress points, that I could peel something with my fingernail. I need some sort of descriptor, because you are my eyes and ears, and as an assistant horse management judge. And also the demonstration of, if you had to clean something with your fingernail, the competitor sees that, and that usually sticks with them. They understand why they had a point. The other tactic I use is, and this happens a lot with the rider's attire, and a lot of times they've hurried, they've got the perfect tied stock, they look amazing, but they've forgotten to do that final dust off of their boots. And I'll be like, if you were judging yourself and you looked at yourself, what would you say would be the strongest point and the weakest point of your turnout? And they usually do the visual, and they get to their boots, and so then they tell you. And that is also really powerful, to have the competitor tell you where they could improve, because they understand it. The worst is that they get the form, they feel like they were at a different turnout inspection, and they don't understand where it came from, because that gets relayed to the parent or the associated coach, and then it becomes like, you know, and that's how horse management gets that reputation. And so the more that you can say what you're doing, I don't think you can undertalk at a pony club rally by any means. And then, you know, when you see the same saddle at a turn back and be like, oh yeah, I remember this one. Oh, it was so well conditioned. It really just reinforces what you're trying to get. So you're not just judging them once, and you remind them that horse management is this continuing process. So that's pretty much what I have for a turnout inspection, the most stressful part of a rally, but also the most rewarding. I go to every competition, be it pony club or not. I want that comment from the dressage judge that says, well turned out horse and rider. If I don't get that on a test, I'm more devastated than if I get a bad score. So, you know, I think it's a huge point of pride, and it's how you know a pony club member from somebody else. So I think it's a really important thing. So good luck.